from a humanitarian perspective alone. We think in IOM that we must develop and use a development lens as well, putting human rights and peace building perspectives at the center through a whole of society approach with all actors, including women, youth, private sector, all local authorities. They all have a role to play. We must work today to offer a better and safer future for new generations so that they can enjoy, of course, peace and a healthy planet. To go forward, moving forward, our messages that were already highlighted by our Deputy Director General, allow me to repeat them, are that first, we need more efforts. So we need a stronger commitment by the international community to better integrate, first of all, human mobility in climate policies at national, regional, global level. Doing so in national adaptation plans is crucial, for instance, or is critical. Second, we need increased adaptation when it is still possible, as the MP outlined it. It is true when it is still possible, and we must increase disaster risk reduction measures, action, and resources in order to avert, minimize, address displacement, and strengthen people's resilience, including in loss and damage situations. We need to set up efforts to support the most vulnerable countries and people, to strengthen their access to sustainable and predictable finance for addressing climate change related human mobility through both adaptation solutions and loss and damage measures. And we need to assure an inclusive mobilization of all public, private, and non-profit partnerships to address human mobility in the context of climate change, as well as inclusive negotiation processes which can amplify the voices of people in situations of vulnerability. With COP27 just around the corner, we should put all our collective efforts to promote climate-related human mobility considerations within Sharm el-Sheikh's not only discussions, but above all, within that very important COP commitments and decisions. And IOM counts on the political support of the government of Bangladesh to continue making a strong call with us in Sharm el-Sheikh in this direction. Thank you very much to all.
inundate 18% of our land mass, directly impacting 11% of the people. And in between, in 2014, in SARC Summit 2014 and BIMSTEC Summit 2014, she had the same message to the global community. So 4 messages are extremely important for Bangladesh and for also outside the world. And what is happening at the country level, at home? There are several national policy documents that also recognize the climate change induced migration and call for efficient system to integrate the new people, migrants into the city and provide housing to the new population and job opportunity. And if you look at the second point, the government will closely work with the urban planners to ensure that the needs of the communities are very well met, and who seek to migrate from the regions vulnerable to the impact of climate change are able to do so. So we need to facilitate a system so that the people can have the opportunity and migrate. And Bangladesh Climate Change Strategy and Action Plan 2009, these also recognize the climate change induced migration. And this critically mention that if we do not strengthen the existing polders and build the new embankments, we will actually see the impact of sea level rise and migration flow within the country. As I mentioned earlier, there is a national strategy on internal displacement management 2021. This has been prepared by the Ministry of Disaster Management in association with some of the partners, Bangladeshi partners, RAMRU, and Climate Finance Transparency Mechanism partners in the country. And this also suggests that we should adopt the preventive and adaptive measures in the country. And my last point on this issue is the climate budget in Bangladesh. We invest $1 billion a year, almost 6 to 7% of its annual budget, to improve, increase the climate resilience in the country. And of course, the government of Bangladesh and non-government sectors of the country welcome partnership with UN agencies and international organizations, for example, IOM. I would just like to add what we are doing at the Climate Bridge Fund, and I would like to share here that there are a lot of, non-government organizations, research organizations, academic institutions. They are also working on this climate change and migration issue within the country, and also try to communicate this important issue at the global level. In 2019, BRAC, with support from the government of Germany through KfW, to support climate migrants in 5 cities and Purushabha area. This includes Barishal, Khulna, Rajshahi, Shirazganj, and Satkhira Purushabha. And we have 2 windows, climate change window and emergency response window. Under these 2 windows, we are investing approximately 23 million euros in Bangladesh. And this is my last slide. I just want to refer one concern from the perspective plan, where the perspective plan says that if this migration flow continues, then the cities in Bangladesh might experience challenges to meet the needs of these communities and also tackle the urban poverty and maintain the law and order, which has been mentioned by the chief guest. So based on this concern, I would like to raise here 2 major issues which needs to be discussed further. The number 1 is the institutional arrangement to manage and deal the climate change induced migration. Look at the current scenario. We have 3 organizations. The people who migrate from the rural areas and where they go in the destination, this destination and origins, both locations are under the jurisdiction of the Ministry of LGRE. But if you come to the Ministry of Disaster Management, they have already developed a strategy, national strategy, and on the disaster issue, they have some mandates. But if you consider the climate change issue, this issue goes to the Ministry of Environment and Forest. So how these 3 ministries, 3 organizations can collectively deal this issue? So we need to have an institutional appropriate mechanism to deal this climate change and migrant issue. My second issue is the immediate mechanism to monitor the climate change migrants. Otherwise, we might face the challenges as our chief guest mentioned on the security issue. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Rabbani, for your very informative deliberation. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll now begin the thematic session on positioning Bangladesh in the context of human mobility, drawing on global and regional policy frameworks. I will request our distinguished panelist and moderator to take their places on the stage. I would also like to request Mr. Abul Kalam Azad, former Special Envoy of CVF Bangladesh Presidency, to begin the panel discussions, followed by a short open discussion. Over to you, sir.
Honorable Foreign Minister, Honorable Member of Parliament, Mr. Sabir Hossain Chaudhry, distinguished participants, diplomats, and members from the civil society. It's a great pleasure for me to conduct this session. We all know this globe facing so many issues of devastating situation like sea level rise, cyclone, river erosion, heat wave, drought, flood, so many. And day by day, all these are being more frequent and more devastating, causing huge displacement and migration. We heard a good statistics from the deliberation of the speakers in the opening session and also the keynote speeches. I don't want to repeat those. And disasters, these may be classified two types in terms of time needed for the disaster. There is sudden and slow. Obviously, flash flood, cyclone, heat wave, river erosion, these are very quick. And slow is drought, sea level rise and all this. But it causes three types of displacement: temporary, permanent, and in between. And how to address this mobility, this displacement? So Bangladesh, along with the whole globe, working on this, and especially Bangladesh, so many initiatives. Go back home, shelter program, beggars rehabilitation, different safety net, my home, my farm, my home, my farm. So many activities. And though Honorable Chief Guest and the keynote speaker, they mentioned about that migration may cause sometimes prosperity, but people don't want to move from their ancestral home. Need to address vulnerability, especially women, children, and with special needs. We have 4 distinguished panelists to discuss here. Just on my right, Dr. Salimul Haq is here. Dr. Haq, he is the director of the International Center for Climate Change and Development and a professor at the Independent University, as well as associate and International Institute on Environment and Development in United Kingdom. He is also chair of the expert advisory group of Climate Vulnerable Forum. Dr. Haq, he worked very closely, rather lead author of the 3rd, 4th, and 5th assessment report for the IPCC. We have distinguished panelists just on the right to Dr. Haq. She is Dr. Farheen Ahmed. She is the Secretary of Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change. A career bureaucrat of 29 years experience, graduated from Monash University in Australia with Masters in International Development, Environment and Sustainability. She also received her PhD from RMIT University of Australia. On her right, we have Ms. Dilruba Haidar. Ms. Dilruba Haidar leads the UN Women Climate Change, Disaster Risk Reduction and Humanitarian Portfolio. Over the course of her 30-year career, she has worked as senior official in UNDP, former DFID, and BPDC. And finally, on her right, we have distinguished panelist Mr. Atli Sorberg, head of the Secretariat.
Sorry,
Did I miss it?
it's platform on disaster, please. Yes.
So, he is expert of international humanitarian action in the context of displacement, both in conflict and natural hazard situation. A researcher and teacher in University of Bergen, and long working experience on the issues of sustainable Balkans, Central America, Norway, Indonesia, and so many. These 4 very rich, distinguished panelists. I would first start with Ms. Farheen. You may please share your experience and especially the initiatives which has been taken by the government of Bangladesh.
Thank you, sir, for giving my introduction and also giving me opportunity to speak before this very enlightening and noble gathering. And I thank Minister of Foreign Affairs and IOM for organizing this very timely and important event before our COP27. As you mentioned that I'm a career civil servant working in the government for 29 years in different ministries and public organizations. I wouldn't claim myself, I have been working in this ministry only for 2 months. So I'm not claiming that I'm sitting here as an expert, but being a daughter of the soil and daughter of this planet, I understand the situation of this country, of this planet, and I am aware of climate change vulnerabilities of this country as well as the whole world. Being secretary of this ministry, I have looking at the existing document and coming to learn the emerging issues and trying to internalize what should be our priority. And our learned presenters, two of our keynote speakers, they have mentioned all the documents and commitments, our perspective plan, our Delta plan, our strategies, and our national adaptation plan at the draft stage, and Mujib Climate Prosperity Plan, which is also at the final stage of final stage of approval. Having all these, I would say that climate change and migration nexus is not yet to be understood, yet to be uttered strongly. We all know that our country, we have a different ministries, separate ministry for disaster management and disaster management. So we call it in a different form, that disaster is coming, we are facing disasters, we are managing disaster. But why disaster? What is the relationship with the climate change and the disaster? That is not also clearly established within the public sector organizations. So whole of government approach is needed, yet to be established. So with consultation or with our ministry, Ministry of Disaster Management, they have developed an internal displacement strategy in 2021. In the strategy, there are 3 parts. One is before prevention, and another is during disaster and the calamities and the displacement, and then afterwards, how to face with that misery and to make the situation, handling the situation. That is the 3 part. And in connection with our ministries, we are pushing forward both the before part as a mitigation part, and also we focus on adaptation part. We are constantly working, and we are focusing on adaptation. As our learned speaker, they have mentioned that our Honorable Prime Minister, her leadership and what points she is focusing on, emphasizing on, is putting 50-50 weightage on adaptation and mitigation. So wherever the fund is coming from, we need to allot or allocate, take the projects both for the mitigation and adaptation. In our ministry, as a mitigation, although we are a very, very negligible level of, we are contributing to the carbon emission gas, it is very negligible, 0.4-0.7% of the total emission. But still, we have prepared our NDC in last year, and also we are planning to do it on regular basis, so that our commitment and our should be demonstrated in the national level, also in the global level. So we are focusing on mitigation. We are putting emphasis on doing a large level of afforestation, greenification, creating a green belt within the border of this island, of this country, so that our vulnerability, our natural calamities can be tackled in a better way. So that is another thing government is putting, taking our projects in the ADB, that we are focusing on afforestation. And also at the same time, we are allocating from our own resources, that is 100 crore taka in the Bangladesh Climate Change Trust Fund for adaptation only, dedicated to adaptation. But the irony is that the thematic areas for that climate change fund, that is a kind of creating competition to the different ministries and organizations who will get the fund. And definitely, as I have mentioned, that migration and the climate change nexus is not in the surface. So from that fund, it is not possible to utilize to allocate for climate change and migration research and doing specific activities. So we are now working on revising that trust fund allocation thing and making new guidelines. I'm currently working on those areas where we can have a place for that migration directly. And also we want to use not the internal displacement word. In our national adaptation draft plan, we are trying to use the migration word, because internationally, when we use the word internal displacement, it becomes a responsibility of the national government that we need to accommodate our people, the displaced people. We need to do things for our own people. But it is also the responsibility, there is a responsibility of global community as well, because they are the climate change, the climate change victims. So we need to make that term very clear that they are also migrants. They are not only internally displaced. And we need to do research and statistical database so that we can show the global community. And we need to portray, we need to document their miseries and the statistics, the facts and findings to convince the global community that what is the position of the climate victims. So we are focusing as a Ministry of Climate Change, Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, we are putting emphasis on doing more research, developing statistics, and making a clear understanding and awareness about the climate change and migration nexus to address and to reduce the misery of the people. And our national strategy, I think, in our current mechanism, there are a lot of programs. As Sir has mentioned, our learned moderator has mentioned that Ashroyan Prokolpo, our skills employment program, and there are social security measures. There are many measures to address the climate vulnerable migrants, and they are in a miserable situation. Specifically, we need to I would like to mention about the recent flash flood. It was not the rainy season due to the regular monsoon or regular flood. It was a clear demonstration of climate change vulnerability and the occurrence. So we are trying to develop the right kind of assessment, the database, the facts and figures of loss and damages, to work on further, to take decision what kind of, how we can address their miseries and reduce their miseries in the national level, also to raise their position, on behalf of their, as a country people, we need to speak on behalf of them to the global community. In response to the heat wave of the current European region, we have organized, we are talking about heat wave and its consequence. We also need to talk about our flash flood and the misery of our people. Okay. And we need to demonstrate we need to raise it in the global level. And comparing to heat wave, the damage, loss, and misery is not less than the heat wave. Right. So we must establish that kind of fact. We must show and we must showcase, we must let the global community know and show the nexus with the climate change and the migration vulnerability in Bangladesh specifically. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Farhina. You have discussed the issues which has been addressed by the government. My single question with you, these three types of steps, before the disaster, during and after, which would be the best one for stopping or reducing the migration?
Definitely the prevention is better than cure. So that's why we all are gathered here. I think we all understand that prevention is better than cure. So the misery that is occurring, that has already occurred, we need to address that. At the same time, we need to stop further occurrence. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Now I will come to Dr. Haq. Dr. Haq, how best we can address displacement for climate change, and especially where Dr. Farhina stopped, that the early part of the disaster, how we can strengthen.
Thank you very much, sir, and good afternoon to everybody. Assalamu alaikum. I will make three sets of comments, sir, in response to your question. The first one is with respect to the science of climate change. As you all know, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which produces regular reports, recently published the 6th assessment report in 30 years. And it's the first time that the IPCC has shown climate change is happening already. Not something is going to happen in the future, it's happening now. And we are already suffering the losses and damages that are attributable to human-induced climate change, because temperature has already gone up by 1.2 degrees, as Honorable MP Sabir Hossain Chaudhary has already mentioned. Therefore, we have now entered the era of loss and damage from climate change, and one of the consequences of failure to adapt is that people will move. If they are unable to continue living where they are living today, they will be forced to move. Now, that is looking at it from the problem side. On the other hand, if you turn it around, it's a two-sided coin. There is also an opportunity side. If we anticipate and we prepare for this going forward, then we can turn a challenge into an opportunity, as the Honorable Minister has said. And I think in Bangladesh, we have been able to show, particularly on adaptation to climate change, that we have successfully not eliminated the problem, but reduce the impacts of the problem very, very considerably in Bangladesh. You heard from Ghulam Rabbani the fact that the death rate from events in Bangladesh has completely been eliminated almost. You know, the few that die nowadays are exceptions rather than the rule. And so we have been quite successful in disaster preparedness and adaptation, but now we are facing loss and damage. Loss and damage is a new phenomena, and that comes to the second point, where at the global level, we have to take this up at the Conference of Parties of the UN Framework Convention. The upcoming one, COP27, will be in Sharm el-Sheikh. Just a few weeks ago, we had the preparatory meeting in Bonn. This was an agenda item. The Glasgow Dialogue on Loss and Damage has been initiated, but we can't stop at dialogue, as Sabir Bhai has said. We need to go from dialogue to action, and that's something that Bangladesh needs to be promoting at the global level, and hopefully we will be a very strong advocate for having an agenda item for addressing loss and damage in COP27, which is still not an accepted agenda item. We're going to have to fight to get it accepted, but it is a provisional agenda item. And then the third and final point I'll make is in the context of Bangladesh. If we sit back and wait for it to happen, it will be a crisis and emergency. But if we anticipate and we prepare for it, then we can minimize it. We cannot eliminate it. Problems will still happen, but we can minimize those problems. And one of the ideas that my center has been working on, along with many other partners, is developing in Bangladesh what we call climate resilient, migrant friendly towns. We've identified about 24 towns around Bangladesh where we can invest in attracting the potential migrants who are going to come mainly from low-lying coastal zone. Instead of bringing them to Dhaka or having them end up in Dhaka or Chittagong, can we get them to come to these other towns? We can if we prepare the economic opportunities, education opportunities, and to attract these future climate migrants to be able to go at their own volition, not be forced, but plan their own, not plan for them by the government, but enable them to plan their own migration. So we feel that this is a very prospective area where Bangladesh can be a leader. As we have been in adaptation, we can also be a leader in loss and damage and preparing our population for inevitable migration when they have to do it, but being ready to do that in advance. So the final point I'll make is that as has already been mentioned, this has to be a whole of society approach. Government takes the lead, but civil society follows and works with them, and academics and researchers like myself, we can also contribute. All of us have a role to play, and we need to be playing that role much more effectively than we have been. We're doing it in parallel, but we need to connect it up. Thank you, sir.
Dr. Haq, thank you very much. How do you see the initiative of government in terms of Ghare Fera, shelter program, Ashrayon, rehabilitation of the beggars, how these can be more strengthened for this migration?
Absolutely correct. So basically, Bangladesh has a very, I would say, positive reputation and history of approaching poverty. So we have been very good at identifying who are the poorest people in the country, what do we need to do to help them, and the government has initiated a number of programs to do that in terms of poverty alleviation. We now need to combine that with potentially climate vulnerable impacts and climate displacement as well. This is a new category of vulnerable people that is now emerging because of climate change that was not there before. Let us see if we can combine them all together in a much more integrated manner, as Ghulam Rabbani in his keynote speech also mentioned the need for different ministries who are working on different aspects of the problem to find some way to connect them. This is a nexus issue. It's not a single ministry issue. No, Ministry of Environment and Climate Change cannot do it alone. Local government has to be involved, and the Foreign Ministry has a big role to play, particularly in doing this kind of dialogues and policy dialogue at the global level, to make Bangladesh's views known and experience to be shared with other countries. We have very, very good positive experiences that we can share with other developing countries. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Now I'll come to Ms. Dilruba Haidar. Ms. Haidar, you especially work with the women vulnerability. So how climate change in terms of displacement affects the vulnerable, especially women and the children with special needs, and how to combat it?
Thank you very much, sir. First, I think I'll start with the issue. I mean, there is actually a term called feminization of migration. I mean, the problem is, I mean, it's not just, it's related to data, but it's not just data, it's perception also. I mean, when a man crosses a border, he's a migrant, but the women are considered as the dependents of the men, and many a times, in fact, almost always, women are absentee migrants. So we really, not just in Bangladesh, globally, I don't think we have data to show how many women have been migrating. And related to climate change, it's almost, we are completely in dark. So that is something that we really have to keep in mind, because there are many studies which have shown that women suffer the most in displaced situation, because women are disconnected from their social structure, the protective structures, the communities, their families. So women are more vulnerable to all sorts of exploitation, be it social, economic, as well as sexual exploitation. So unless we know who are migrating, meaning women, how many women from which community, with their background, unless we know that, it will be difficult for us to it will be difficult for us to strategize as to how we support and the women who are migrating. And also, I think we also need to understand that migration can entrench the inequality, precisely for the reason that I have just said, that the existing inequality in the society is only exacerbated when women are migrating. There are we had done, even women, we had done a study in 2015, and that showed that, women, and not just women, and people, and you have said, sir, in the beginning, that people don't necessarily want to move out of their places. They want to remain in their ancestral homes. And our study has shown that people don't want to, even when they are faced with climatic problems or disasters, they want to move out to a closer destination. They don't necessarily want to go out of country or to completely another district. But whatever the situation is, the women, the moment they are moving out of their own village, their own social network, they become instantly vulnerable. And wherever they are going, the destination don't necessarily have the necessary facility or the structure which would ensure women's protection and safety and security. So therefore, it's extremely important to make sure that women are we understand women's vulnerability and the migration pattern for the women. Also, the fact that there are also women. The other perspective is that some women are, in fact, most of the women are not necessarily migrating. The men are migrating out, and the women are being left behind. So how these women are coping? So it is also the impact, because of the disasters in a little while ago in the keynote speech we have heard that the population in the southwest is going down because men are actually moving out. It's becoming uninhabitable in the southwestern part of the country. So when women, when we go to Bagherhat, Khulna, those areas, we see a lot of female-headed households. So now how these women are surviving and how these women are coping, there is a huge question mark, because the scenario there is really not is entirely unfavorable for female-headed households to survive there. And be it the social situation, because women, when the women are living alone, there are a lot of, our study, it has shown that 60% women were saying that we spend sleepless night because we are afraid of theft. The women are the young women, the young wives who have their husbands moving out. They are not going out fearing the teasing, all sorts of abuses kind of things. So these are social problem, and together on top of that, the economic hardship, because husbands moving out doesn't necessarily mean the husbands are immediately sending money. So the women are faced with meeting, doing their usual household chores, care burden is there. And on top of that, the women are, burdened to feed their family. And the work opportunity isn't there enough at all in the southwest part of the country, for instance, So all these things we have to remember. So the women who are moving out, we have to see that whether women have the necessary skills to live a dignified life. So we know some of the areas people will have to move out, like Southwest. So the potential migrant women, we have to make sure that they have necessary skills, that wherever they go, they are able to live a dignified life. And the women who are left behind, they also need to have the necessary protective measures. For instance, we have Village Defense Party, we have VDP answers. Some sort of protective mechanisms need to be put in place so that the women who are left behind are able to live with safety and security, and livelihood opportunities to be created at the place where they are. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Haidar. You raised so many good suggestions for addressing the vulnerability of the women. We all know vulnerables are more vulnerable, worst vulnerable in terms of climate. Thank you. Now I will come to Mr. Attlee. Mr. Attlee, as political scientist, how do you see the migration and displacement, and especially role of international organization, development partners, and the development organizations, their role? Do you feel that these are sufficient?
Thank you. How much time do I have? So, good afternoon, everyone, and Honorable Foreign Minister, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for inviting us to this very exciting policy dialogue. I want to congratulate Bangladesh and IOM for such a timely and relevant event. I really like the title and the starting point. Let's get together to land on some narrative or a common narrative in terms of problem statement, and then turn to what do we need to do. So I think that's an excellent pitching. I work for something called the Platform on Disaster Displacement, which is a state-led initiative, and a secretariat is based in Geneva. It's currently under the leadership of the European Union, just handed over from Fiji. And Bangladesh has been a key role in the work of the Platform on Disaster Displacement. It held the chairmanship in 2018 and 19, and it was also a founding members of the Nansen Initiative, and a key player to develop the Nansen Initiative protection agenda that was endorsed by 110 states in 2015. So, Chair, you asked me about as a political scientist, and that brings me into one aspect which I think is extremely important around the politics of this, and that's what happens around loss and damage under the United Nations Framework Convention for Climate Change. And I was very intrigued, Mr. Chowdhury, what you said about moving from mitigation to adaptation, and now we are talking about loss and damage. And then there will be something next, maybe. But maybe there won't be something next, because this is the end of the road. The moment we are referring to loss, that's something that is lost, and that's quite final. So we are at the end of the road, and we have to seize that opportunity to fix loss and damage. And I think I've heard it already from Professor Hack and others. There is an opportunity within the Warsaw International Mechanism for Loss and Damage. There are some progressing being made in the institutional arrangement of Santiago Network on Loss and Damage. There's a Glasgow dialogue on climate financing. So despite all the frustration I think there is, despite all the limited progress that the Warsaw International Mechanism has proven to show since 2013, I will appeal to everyone to keep up the stamina, and for Bangladesh also to continue that dialogue and negotiation within that context, because that is one of the places where we can work on loss and damage, and where we also have specific recommendation around averting, minimizing, and addressing displacement in the context of the adverse effect of climate change. So there are already COP decisions that endorses these or endorse these recommendations, so that gives us something to work on. So I just wanted to appeal to everyone to keep faith in that mechanism. Again, loss and damage is at the end of the road, and it needs to complement very robust commitments and objectives around mitigation and adaptation as well. I know we are towards the end of a very long day. I wanted to say something about what we also have talked about, how important it is to link a discussion of human mobility to loss and damage. We have spoken a lot of intersection today, and I think we all can agree that this is complex. The way people move, the typical need they may have, and what are the solutions to why people are moving in different contexts. That's a given, and we need to strengthen our evidence on that. But as more and more people will move, and we know that there are more scientific findings on this also from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, every movement will include some type of risk or cost. And we need to build up the governance and the institutional arrangement to manage that mobility as it will grow in the future. And I think we have heard today the importance of having governance framework in place, institution, financing, knowledge and monitoring system, and policies. And that brings me maybe a bit more concretely to the reality in Bangladesh, and also very pleased to see how Bangladesh has developed some of these policy tools and instruments. We have heard about the national strategy on internal displacement management. There is an action plan being developed according to that strategy. So that's an also opportunity to put implementation capacity to such a fantastic strategy that covers the all aspects. We heard about it: avert, minimize, and address, before and after. So that's something to work on. There are the climate prosperity plan we heard about. So what can we do to work together to fill that also with financing? So we turn from a situation of vulnerability to prosperity. And I also want to congratulate the role of Bangladesh, strong adaptation planning, strong NDCs, and also what the tremendous work that has taken place under the Climate Vulnerable Forum, having a strong focus on displacement and human mobility. That brings me to the end of what I wanted to say. We are here this week, the Platform on Disaster Displacement. We will meet with MOFA and other ministries also for disaster risk management. We have received funding from the Norwegian Agency for Development Cooperation. We're also working with ICAD and RAMRU, and we would like to propose, this is a 3-year program that will focus on action and support on how to avert, minimize, and address displacement. And I invite everyone to give us good ideas in how that can look like from an operational action point plan of view in Bangladesh. So we are here until Thursday, happy to talk to you. What could that look like in order to maybe move towards, even with a very small piece of contribution, to an action pathway on how to avert, minimize, and address displacement. So with that, thank you so much, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Attlee. We know loss and damage causes human displacement and need to work to stop, rather reduce loss and damage. And we know $1 investment in adaptation saves $9 in terms of loss and damage. So thank you, the great panelists. Now we want to open the floor for the discussion. We will take a few questions, as less as possible or as brief as possible. My request will be, if you please ask your question very briefly, then our panelist is here to answer. Microphone. Yes, microphone, please.
Thank you for panelists for their presentation. My name is Aminul. I am working with the Coast Foundation. So one of my recommendation to the agencies, especially IOM and PDD and UNFCCC, those who are coordinating the frameworks for displacement issues, because we are talking about always migration and opportunity for developed countries or vulnerable countries. So through this framework, we should work how we can develop a quota system through the framework for climate vulnerable countries, where this country will facilitate the displacement people.
Hello.
Because Bangladesh, in fact, have a limited capacity due to its land crisis, but has huge opportunity to make these human people with skill and semi-skill where they can provide for the developing countries. If we work this for this quota, and I think they are both developed countries and vulnerable countries, they will be benefited. So this may be a real pathway of action where our Honorable Prime Minister MP has addressed. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. We will take the question together and then answer.
My name is Reza. I'm from Coast, and also I'm the member of PDD Advisory Committee. Everything has discussed, especially my friend Ghulam Rabbani has given a very wide canvas, and he was with us. Now he's other side of the table. We have simultaneously created civil society mobilization from all over the world, from Bali to even in Copenhagen and in all the COPs, especially for the climate migrants. And this is our Prime Minister who has created the example. You said about the Asrayan Prakolpo, but before that, from 2004, she has constructed a 26 high-rise building in Cox's Bazar, Kurushkul, who are all climate migrant from the Kutubdia Island from the 1991 cyclones. So these are the great example from Bangladesh that world can take how much people we have accommodated in all these Asrayan Prakolpos. But you know that Bangladesh is the innocent victim of these climate catastrophes. In this meeting, everything has discussed, but I wonder why it has not discussed, that is Bangladesh Delta Plan 2100. I know that this has created with the two most important concepts. One is economic growth, another one is environmental sustainability. I will request all the development partners to come forward for the assistance to our prime ministers and towards our country.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. I will take the last question.
Thank you, sir. My name is Samsud Duha. I work for a research organization. It's called CPRD, Center for Participatory Research and Development. My concern is that what is our political argument when we talk about climate change-induced displacement and migration? Because I am listening and also participating similar discussion maybe since last 15 years. So I didn't find any progress in the political discourse, particularly under the UNFCCC. Because when we talk about climate change-induced displacement and migration, there should have some spaces under the UNFCCC to discuss this agenda. It was under loss and damage, but this has been lost. There are some talks about displacement and migration, but there is no particular negotiation under the UNFCCC. My particular question to our Secretary, Madam, whether should Bangladesh, along with other LDC countries, could give a particular submission to the UNFCCC to open a separate agenda item for discussion for addressing climate change-induced displacement and migration. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. I will take exactly the last question. Ms. Mehazamin. Can there be a microphone?
With the Parliamentarian Caucus on Migration and Development, I'm the Secretary General. We have been working on migration-related awareness programs and advocacies from the grassroots to national and international level. So, as you know, Mr. Azad, you're from Jamalpur. I'm also from Jamalpur, and every year we see floods and river erosion in our area. So, when these floods and river erosion occurs, the farmers, they lose land, so they move. But can we not think about change their livelihood and make them self-resilient or self-sufficient, and so that they don't move from one place to another? And we have seen they always come back to the big cities like Dhaka or Chittagong. And as you know, that Ghazipur is known as people from Jamalpur. People are doing rickshaw, like the rickshaw pullers are from Jamalpur. So Mrs. Salimul Haq has already said there's pilot project going on. So why can't we do with the river erosion people also the same kind of projects to see if they can stay in their own place, not move around? And you know, the women and the children, they suffer too, because they are affected more, they're vulnerable, and we see more trafficking, slavery, prostitution among those people. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Now I will come to the panelists. Each can answer or respond. Dr. Haq.
Thank you very much. I'll make just two recommendations for the consideration of the group and the government of Bangladesh. Firstly, on the science of climate change, I mentioned that the IPCC has just finished the 6th assessment, They are now planning the 7th assessment. And in the planning phase, Bangladesh can put forward a proposal for the IPCC to do a special report on loss and damage and migration. This is how we did the 1.5 special report in IPCC. The CVF countries were the ones who pushed for it. We got a special report. Special report can be done in a smaller time frame, 1 or 2 years' time. So at the next IPCC meeting, which is represented by MOFCC, Bangladesh, together with the Climate Vulnerable Forum, we can propose a special report of the IPCC within the next 2 years on loss and damage and migration, in particular, that nexus. And then secondly, in the context of the upcoming COP27, again, the CVF countries together, now under Ghana's leadership, but with Bangladesh as member of Troika, we should be pushing for a solid agenda item on loss and damage. Right now, on migration, as opposed to being under the Warsaw International Mechanism, the issue of migration is a sub-topic in the UNFCCC. It needs to be brought up to a major topic in the UNFCCC, and Bangladesh can lobby for that. It may not happen in COP27, but if we start the process now, by COP28, we may be able to do that. So 2 things to consider doing. Thank you, sir.
Yes, Dr. Farina.
Thank you from the audience. You supplemented an urge for framework for international community to get a quota for migration in the developed countries. So that kind of framework, we are also looking forward for that. We'll definitely make necessary communication and lobbying for that to get that opportunity for our country. And regarding in the COP27, upcoming COP27, we are currently working on developing our reports and preparation, and hopefully our Honorable Prime Minister, she will be leading the country delegation. So it is a kind of demonstration and commitment from our country that we are very serious. It was there in the previous COP, also will be in this COP. So we are in the drafting stage of our reports and positioning. So in this context, I think this event, this discussion, panel discussion, and the keynote speaker, speaking, and all the outcomes, that is also a kind of push forward the agenda before us to consider in our report, and another audience come up with the findings that what we can do for the river erosion people. Yes, it is in the disaster management strategy for internal displacement. There is a provision for growth center, developing growth center, and there will be some provision and arrangement for each growth center to address the need of the displaced people. So I think that district will also be covered during this due course. So I think, thank you for
thank you. Thank you, Ms. Dilruba.
Thank you very much. I just want to respond to the last comment about the river erosion and the people being displaced as a result of that. I remember there was a study done 8-9 years ago which showed that in Bangladesh alone, about 1 lakh people are displaced because of river erosion alone. So it is a serious situation, and of course there are, the study hasn't been done probably very robustly as to whether we connect river erosion also with climate change, but there is, of course, there are many issues that we can connect the dots. But because of the river erosion, and there are many studies which have shown that a lot of women in brothels are river erosion victims. So this river erosion is a serious problem, and the problem with strategizing and trying to support these groups is again going back to the problem of unavailability of data. I mean, I can't give more emphasis on the importance of having disaggregated data. If we have the disaggregated data, we can then find, develop strategy as to how we can support the women and the men, and develop strategy and programs for that. So that is absolutely important. Thank you very much for raising this issue, because I think river erosion has been and is a major problem for Bangladesh. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Attlee.
Thank you. I also wanted to respond to your question, which I think is very important. If you go to the Pacific, the movement of people, they say repeatedly, is last resort. They don't really want to entertain a discussion around displacement before we have exhausted all our tools around resilience, risk reduction, adaptation. It's a movement, it's an option of last resort. I think that is an extremely important message to get through. But we do know, and I think we heard it earlier today, there are limits to adaptation. We know that scientists are talking about hard adaptation limits, talking about tipping points. So I think we should also recognize the fact that there will be situations where people literally will have to move, either because the sea level has risen to a level where it makes it impossible to have settlement, or the desertification is so far-reaching that agricultural work is not possible. So we have to have this very broad messaging around mitigation, adaptation, development, and addressing the fact. But we have to recognize that this will increase. There will be many places on Earth, unfortunately, that cannot sustain human settlement. And we better prepare for that sooner rather than later, so we are not overwhelmed with the crisis. The final point I wanted to make, there was a question on financing, which I think is extremely important, and a huge gap. We know that the losses and the damages are amounting to both economical and non-economic costs, and we need to work on that. One challenge, a little around, and maybe Professor Salim Haq will respond to this, is that it's very political, any discussion around financing for loss and damage. So I think we also need to have, again, two conversations going. One is, how can we unpack and make technical access to financing without making that part of a political discussion around compensation, and use the existing funding mechanism. And we do know that financing human mobility, for example, planned relocation, is very difficult under the Green Climate Fund. So we also need to de-block those hurdles, so we get access to funding for human mobility when it's unavoidable, and building up the capacity of multilateral development banks for financing human mobility, while we simultaneously continue that political discussion I mentioned about loss and damage and the financing mechanism that will be required for averting, minimizing, and addressing displacement.
Thank you. So, dear audience, I would be happy to continue discussion, question and answer. But unfortunately, for time constraint, I beg apology. I don't want to float the second tranche of questions. I understand that my colleagues, they have noted the recommendations. So far, I noted the first one, as Mr. Chaudhary said, let us stop climate change first and try to find out the root causes. We need global dialogue, global disclosure with a global narratives to combat. Alternative adaptation policy is required. Whole of the society approach to combat climate change and displacement. Adaptation plan is crucial. COP27 should have specific decision on displacement. Climate budget, institutional arrangement to combat mobility, need to implement Mujib Climate Prosperity Plan and Delta 2100. Migration nexus should be on surface. I believe the rapporteur, they noted all this, and we will put this to Honorable Chief Guest, Honorable Minister, and you will guide us how to take forward the recommendations of today. Thank you. Thank you, participants, for cooperating me.
Thank you, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, hello. Ladies and gentlemen, let me express our sincere appreciation to the distinguished panelist and moderator for their kind contribution. I would also like to thank all the participants for your active participation. I would like to request now Mr. Abdul Sattar SOF, Chief of Mission IOM Bangladesh, to kindly make the closing remarks and present the vote of thanks.
Your Excellency, Dr. A.K. Abdul Momin, MP, Honorable Foreign Minister, Affairs, Excellency Mr. Sadr Hussein Chaudhry, Honorable Chair of the Parliamentary Standing Committee on the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, members of the Bangladesh Parliamentary Caucus Migration Development, the Deputy Director General of IOM, Ms. Gwen Lewis, the UN Resident Coordinator, Mr. Farhan Ahmad, Secretary, Minister of Foreign Affairs and Climate Change, representative from other ministries, respected panelists, excellencies, fellow colleagues from UN family, representative from the civil society, representative from the media, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Assalamu alaikum and very good afternoon. I would like to sincerely thank you all for participating in today's dialogue despite your very busy schedules. We have heard from the government of Bangladesh representatives, academia, the United Nations, civil society, NGOs, and IOM's director, Deputy Director General. Bangladesh has long been a pioneer in testing different approaches to sustainable development. And the conversation today are another example of this. We now have a clear set of actions to move forward with it, and if this materializes, they will not only assist the people and government of Bangladesh, but also offer lessons for other climate vulnerable countries in managing migration for the benefit of all. We need to ensure that momentum gained today is not lost and that there are concrete follow-up actions from the government, United Nations, civil society and NGOs and international communities. IOM has an expanding climate migration portfolio in Bangladesh, and our vision is to continue to work and on the issue of as outlined by my Deputy Director General. I invite our sister agencies, civil society organizations, and academia to join us in pursuing this vision. And dear donor communities, realizing this vision will not be possible without your support and commitment moving ahead. I look forward in collaborating with you closely on these issues. We are very proud to have partnered with the Minister of Foreign Affairs in the organizing this, I would say, successful event, and I would like to thank the Honorable Foreign Minister for his personal interest and guidance in conceptualizing the idea of this policy dialogue. Thank you very much, sir. To the team behind today's event, from the Foreign Ministry, especially the Multilateral Economic Affairs Wing and the Foreign Service Academy, and to my team at IOM, I would like to extend a big thank you and congratulations for ensuring the dialogue smooth execution. I would also like to thank the panelists for the insight of an expert's views, and Mr. Abdul Kalam Azad, sir, for moderating the thematic sessions, positioning Bangladesh in the context of human mobility, drawing on global and regional policy frameworks. A special thanks to the keynote speaker, Mr. Caroline Duma, I am Special Envoy for Migration and Climate Change, and Mr. Ghulam Rabbani, Secretary, Head of the Climate Bridge Fund, for providing such rich context for the discussions of today's event. Finally, a big thanks to all you for your participation, both here at the Foreign Academy Service and virtually through internet. We look forward to continuing our work with you all to advance the agenda of climate migration in Bangladesh. Thank you very much once again.
Thank you, Mr. SOF. Ladies and gentlemen, this concludes today's policy dialogue. Thank you all for being with us today and enriching this event. Distinguished guests, we have our colleagues at the exit with some refreshment packets for you. Please proceed to the adjoining room. And our colleagues will take the chief guest and other dignitaries at the dining hall on the ground floor. Thank you all again.